This is Peter Hager. Moving a little bit. So this is Peter Hager. He lives in Florida. He's up in New York for a little bit, and I would call you, I'd call you a bit of an activist. You were very, very active in Tim Canova's campaign during the 2016 election. Not so much this time. You have been active on the ground as far as progressive politics in Florida. Obviously, it's kind of just dumb luck that you showed up when you did, because Bill Nelson just conceded the election to Rick Scott, and that came after yesterday. Andrew Gillum officially conceded to DeSantis. I would say you have a healthy dose of Debbie Wasserman Schultz derangement, like every other progressive.
You know, when you live so close to her, it's kind of hard not to.
Right. So you're up in New York now. Let's start with the immediate news. It's not surprising, but Bill Nelson just conceded to Rick Scott. It hasn't gotten a lot of coverage because Brian Kemp has been so awful, but we shouldn't forget that Rick Scott, as governor of Florida, purged a shit ton of voters off the rolls while he was governor, which probably helped him in his Senate race.
Well, I think any election, especially in a state like Florida, which I know people like to consider Florida to be a swing state, if you will, but when you consider how much the Republicans dominate the state legislature, it's hard to not call it a red state. And so when you have those advantages, when it comes to, for example, purging voters in areas that are likely to lean blue, for example, that's definitely an advantage to the incumbent, which...
Speak up, Peter.
Which is definitely an advantage to a candidate like a Rick Scott, who I think pretty much everybody knew once he was reelected to the governorship that he was going to run for Senate as soon as it was over, since he was term limited out. As much as we can say that played a role, and perhaps it played a significant role, it's not the definitive role that I would say caused Bill Nelson, who was a three-term senator, to lose his seat. I think that there's a combination of things, not the least of which is his voting record, which was terrible, led by his decision to vote in favor of the bank deregulation bill, which I think, as you know, which is very ironic, is that I believe every single Democrat who was up for re-election in the Senate that voted in favor of the bank deregulation bill ended up losing their seat.
Sorry if you're watching in Florida and don't like what I'm going to say, but I don't really give a shit that Bill Nelson lost. I think Rick Scott is terrible. He would know better than me, but Rick Scott, I mean, he defrauded people as a private citizen with a Medicare scheme. He's a terrible Republican. He was on Morning Joe once. He wouldn't denounce Trump's racism and bigotry against Muslims, and Morning Joe, for once, did the right thing and cut him off. So don't get me wrong. I don't think it's great that Rick Scott is now a senator. It wouldn't surprise me if Rick Scott's endgame is to run for president. But part of why I'm saying I don't care that Bill Nelson lost is part of the reason we keep getting extreme conservatives is because we keep propping up Republican lights like Bill Nelson. Not only did he take a hell of a lot of money from the banks, takes a lot of money from the energy companies and the fossil fuel companies. I don't know as much as Debbie, but he probably takes money from Big Sugar, which is a big problem down there. He took money when they were the pipeline in Florida. Why is it escaping me, the name of the pipeline?
The Sable Trail pipeline.
Yeah, he took a lot of money from the parent company of that pipeline. He showed up after the Parkland shooting and said the right things about gun control, but on other economic issues, there's really not a lot of daylight, honestly, between him and Rick Scott. So, in theory, is he a little better than Rick Scott? Yeah, but that's why people like Rick Scott keep winning, because, in addition to the purges, because a little better isn't going to get it done. I think Bill Nelson, A, is not an inspiring person. B, his voting record doesn't match the progressive mood of the country. And C, the only way you're going to actually beat people like Rick Scott and extreme conservatism is with real policies that help the masses, not the few. And you can't, they keep vote blue no matter who. No. You can't keep voting for people like Bill Nelson. So if what it's going to take is Republicans to keep winning until we get actual progressive candidates, then I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think it's great that Rick Scott is now a senator from Florida, but I don't think Bill Nelson, you live in Florida, I don't think he was doing much for the working people of Florida.
Well, what's interesting is Nelson, who's been a senator for almost 2 decades, won 3 elections. He was never challenged. He finally had a challenger, and he didn't know how to basically run an effective campaign. Not the least of which, if you've ever seen him in a debate, his monotone, extremely slow approach is a major turnoff, especially when people want fresh blood, they want new ideas. And you know, one thing that I was very concerned about for Andrew Gillum was when I saw Rick Scott and Bill Nelson have a debate, and it looked like Rick Scott was running circles around him. Mm-hmm. You can't have that when you consider how much of the average voter votes on optics alone. Mm-hmm. They see 2 candidates on stage, and they see Rick Scott, who is 65 and looks 50, versus, with all due respect, Senator Nelson, who's 76 and looks 86. That's not good. So youthful exuberance also plays a role, regardless of what they're selling. Mm-hmm. But having the right attitude, I think, is very significant. The positivity that, albeit as it may be, you know, just lip service coming from Rick Scott, versus somebody like Senator Nelson, who looked, with all due respect, worn down, has been doing this for a long time. The Democratic Party had an opportunity to maybe put up somebody like Ted Deutsch, who frankly caught a lot of fire in lieu of what happened in Parkland, challenged Senator Rubio effectively on a CNN debate. So maybe somebody like him could have provided that fire that would have allowed the Democrats to keep that seat. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, a lot of business as usual, fall in line as they would expect, regardless of what the voting record is. But again, it begs the question, how can you run, especially in Gillum's case, one way during the primary and then a completely different way during the general and expect to have the same results?
So let's get into Gillum. And by the way, while we showed that video in Flint, we got some more contributions. So now we're at $21,040. So my goal for the end of this live stream, and I've been live now for 3 hours and 15 minutes, and I'm staying live until I have to go to dinner for my brother's birthday. So keep us going, keep us growing. I would love to get to 22,000. That's a stretch goal. I don't know if we can make it by the end of today, but let's keep going. And of course, if you're contributing in the super chat, that's good too. Thank you to everyone. So, Andrew Gillum, and you know, I don't want to rub salt in the wounds, because I know there are some progressive people who worked on his campaign and tried to help him to victory. But I think Andrew Gillum's loss is more instructive to actually what's going on nationally. I've already done videos on this, you know what I think, but just for people that don't know what I think. So as far as I could tell, Andrew Gillum won the primary because he ran a bold, progressive campaign. He was unabashed for progressive Medicare for all. I think he was for aggressive action on climate change. I think he was for a lot of the things Bernie was for. And he won over some pretty establishment, well-known candidates in that primary. Gwen Graham, who was well-known down there, heavily funded, all that.
Mayor Levine.
Yeah, so he won as a progressive. But to me, he made the cardinal mistake that a lot of actual progressives, and some of the things in Gillum's background weren't exactly progressive, but at least what he was saying in this campaign was progressive. He made the mistake. He surrounded himself with Democratic Party insiders and consultants who probably essentially told him, great, this is the primary, now you're in the big leagues, you need to sprint to the center because that's not going to play in Florida. And the proof's in the pudding. He started gingerly, not so fast right away, but started gingerly. Medicare for all turned into affordable health care. And some of the language went from progressive to more of like the Democratic Party talking points. There was a poll taken, but it was taken between October 16th and the 20th. He was up by 12 percentage points over Ron DeSantis, who might as well be Trump 40 years younger. I don't know. He's a mini-me of Trump. And all of a sudden, in that national debate that was on CNN October 21st, he says, define Medicare for all. He won't answer whether he's for Medicare for all. He won't answer whether he's for abolishing ICE. He let, to me, Ron DeSantis get away with some really obviously slimy, incorrect falsehoods, and he didn't challenge him on them. And I think, if I'm being fair, we're two white guys, so he probably, as a black man, didn't want to come off like that, the stereotype, and be too harsh because he could have come off as like an angry black man, so to speak. I say that not in a racial way, but that's the reality. Black people have additional challenges when they're running for office. But if you look at the data, he was up 12 points. He basically does a moonwalk to the center. Then he starts taking pictures with Debbie Wasserman Schultz in synagogues. He starts doing fundraisers with Hillary Clinton and Michael Bloomberg. And he just conceded because he went from 12 points up 3 weeks before the election to what ended up happening. I think he lost by 33,000 votes. Take it away.
I think he was an excellent candidate. He clearly was better than Ron DeSantis. I don't think anybody would question that. The way he ran his primary was awe-inspiring. It was all grassroots. Yes, he did take some unsightly money. We all know that as progressives, we want to change the whole dynamic of the way campaign finance is done in this country. But if you want to take the governorship of maybe the most consequential state in the country, especially when it comes to the presidency, to say that money will play a role is an understatement, as it obviously did. It ended up becoming, along with Texas, the two most expensive races by far. So, of course, with that in mind, running one way during the primary, where he embraced Bernie Sanders, and of course he was running third, in some cases fourth, during the primary. Gwen Graham, most people thought was a shoo-in. Mayor Phil Levine from Miami, who spent a lot of money, a lot of his own money, frankly, to try to win the governorship. And then, of course, you also had Jeff Green, who got into the race. And there you had Andrew Gillum, who clearly was the progressive, clearly embraced Bernie's ideals, did say Medicare for all, did say we need to have a solar initiative in the state of Florida. He ends up getting a major windfall when Bernie comes down 2 weeks before the election, and he carried it all the way to the finish line. And of course, he won it on election day because the grassroots were out. They got to the polls, they voted for him, and he got it. And then from there, almost immediately, as soon as the general election began, there were these little tiptoeing away from, well, we were really progressive now, but now we got to pivot, if you will. The dirty word of politics in a general election is the so-called pivot. And there's no doubt that there was a pivot. And of course, whether it's saying affordable health care versus Medicare for all, whether it's saying I am a clean candidate regardless of what may or may not have happened with him in Tallahassee, trying to walk a fine line is not how he got there. I don't know why he felt that that was what was going to get him over the finish line, but I think we also have to talk about some of the money that he was taking and whether or not that had an influence on the decisions he was or was not allowed to make as a candidate.
Right. And I think there's an important point. Yes, I am a progressive, pure person, okay? But I'm not going to hate on Andrew Gillum for taking a hell of a lot of money from, like, Tom Steyer, who's a billionaire. I don't like Tom Steyer's commercials. I think, he does these commercials to impeach Trump. I think they're kind of narcissistic and self-aggrandizing. They're ineffective, whatever. But he does push for some strong policies on the environmental front. He's a billionaire. But you know what? If there's a billionaire right now watching that wants to give me money within the contract, you have no editorial control of my company and you don't have a say at all in what I do, I'll take your money. I'm keeping it real. So Gillum taking money from Tom Steyer, to me, whatever. To me, the problem isn't necessarily if you take money from plutocrats. The problem is, what are the strings attached with that money? The thing with Gillum, and I'm actually, Ty, do me a favor. I want to bring you into this, so call me on my phone. I think the problem with Gillum is it's not a good photo op, and it's not good optics if you run as for Medicare for All and these things when you're doing fundraisers with Hillary Clinton or Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now, Hillary Clinton, people say, just hold on one second, I'm bringing you into this. People say, this is how we do things at Status Quo, keep it real. People say, well, Jordan, why are you against the lesser of two evils on the national level, but you're not against it on the state level? Hillary Clinton has the power as president to create wars. Multiple wars might have happened under Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, her policies affect the whole country and the whole world. Andrew Gillum's doesn't. And I don't think it's, if you think Andrew Gillum was like slightly better than Ron DeSantis, you're not paying attention. He was a lot better than Ron DeSantis. But to me, where Andrew Gillum went wrong is you're galvanizing progressives and young people. Florida has some of the most colleges in America, from the north to the south.
Huge schools.
You need young people to come out and vote for you. Well, those young people don't like Hillary Clinton. Those young people don't like Debbie Wasserman Schultz. A lot of the old people, a lot of the older progressives. So it's a mismatch between what you run for in the primary versus what you're coming off of in the campaign, and some people in the general. And some people have said to me, "Yeah, well, Florida politics, it's complicated, Jordan." Hey, I've been to 35 states. Every state is corrupt. It's not just Florida. Every states have layers of corruption. So I get it, but at a certain point, listen, Hillary outspent Trump 2-1. She lost. She won the popular, but she lost the electoral. So I get it that Gillum probably thought, like, well, I need the money, so I'll bite the bullet and fundraise with Hillary and these people. Yeah, you could make the money to compete, but optically, you're crushing your base, in my view.
Without question, how much of a role it played, I still voted for Gillum, but I know that there were a lot of people who personally were turned off by the fact that he was in any capacity. Hillary Clinton, I can at least somewhat understand, because I understand that we haven't fully gotten away from that part of the Democratic Party that still has effective fundraising capability. But the fact that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who any progressive were to associate the worst of the Democratic Party with, that would probably be the poster child in many ways. And the fact that not only did Gillum have to kiss the ring, he also had to be seen in public with her in a form that seemed extremely, you want to call it tacky, you want to call it strategic, but it was done for political posturing in a way that I think in some way may have hurt his campaign. Now, significantly or not, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I know that being seen publicly with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Michael Bloomberg, who anyone in the black community knows is one of the forebearers of stop and frisk, among other things, it's not a good look.
Right.
And so I think that did hurt him. How significantly, I can't say.